Hey everyone, it's time for an update on the old Unimog 404, and as you can see, it's inside the workshop now, but it's actually been in here for a good while. But it's not because I'm working on it. Actually, I didn't really even want to bring it inside because it's taking up quite a lot of my very limited indoor space. But the thing is, I promised to keep this out of the weather as much as possible, because there has been a change of plans from what I initially had in mind for this thing. And what it really comes down to is that this is no longer mine. Well, actually, it's still kind of mine, sort of, for a bit. Anyway, point is, we gotta get this thing outside and get it prepped for transport, because this thing is on its way out of here. So because it's very downhill when we go into the backyard, well, it's not very downhill, but it is a little bit downhill. I don't really want to pull it down there because if it starts rolling, I don't really have any gentle way to stop it. So I think I'm gonna try to push it while being tied onto it. See if we can do that, at least somewhat gently. So I've deliberately been keeping this thing out of the rain for a good while, and as soon as I bring it back outside, it looks like it's gonna start raining. Oh yeah, it's already started, I can feel it. There is just no winning in this weather. Alright, so first of all, if you haven't seen the first video I did on this, in that one we go out and pick this thing up and you can see the terrible state that it was in when we found it. And there's also a second video where I try to get that engine fired up. I'll leave the links in the description for those, so you can go ahead and check that out if you want. But in that first video, I was talking briefly about this logo right here on the door. Now, it's a bit hard to see on camera, it's a little more clear in person, but anyway, it's a bird with some lightning underneath it and some text that translates to Radio Chain East. Now, I didn't really know what this was all about, but I thought it sounded like it might have been some kind of Cold War comms unit, perhaps, but it could also just not be military related at all. So I took a picture of this stuff and I started asking around in the different groups who know a lot about the history of these vehicles. And actually that part was not as important as the registration number of the vehicle, which I also gave them. But let's just talk about that logo first, because some of you have been asking about it, and I was sort of right. This was a communications unit, sort of. And the bird on here is a Hawk, and that's because this was used as a radio relay for the Hawk missile batteries. So in the last stage of this vehicle's military life, this was a radio or comms unit. So on the back of this, it would have had a big radio communications relay. And because those radio boxes are filled with relatively specialized and expensive equipment, I can only assume that that box was taken off before this was auctioned off to the civilian market. But yeah, so it turned out that was not really the very interesting part of this vehicle's life. It was more about this registration number that I started sharing around. That got me some attention. And soon enough, I was contacted by a gentleman who really wanted to know where in the world I had managed to find this vehicle. Because it turns out there is a handful of people that have been looking for years for exactly this Unimog. Well, I make that sound like there's only one. There were 14 of them, but these guys were utterly convinced that all of them had been either scrapped or otherwise disappeared. But now suddenly, one of them was resurfacing. So I told him about how this had just been several different people's project vehicle and how it eventually just ended up sitting in a scrap pile that we pulled it out of and sort of stacked it back together to make it resemble a vehicle again. And he then proceeded to tell me the story of why this particular Unimog is a bit special. So before these were handed over to the Army to become radio relay trucks, they belonged to the Air Force, and they had 2 of these at each airfield, making a total of just 14 vehicles. And they were set up as so-called rescue cars. That's sort of a combination between a firefighting vehicle and an ambulance. Now, this was the first time that they were really trying to do this, where they were combining these 2 different types of vehicles. Previously, they've had separate vehicles. They had like a firefighting type vehicle and an ambulance type vehicle. But now they were trying to combine all of this into one. And it's a bit comical, but the Unimog was really not a very good platform for that, especially not with the way that they did it. A good example was that the big box that they put on the back, they just fixed that down like they would on a normal truck. The engineering guys didn't really take into account just how much the chassis is flexing on a Unimog. So because they had just put it down on a solid mount, they had essentially stiffened out the chassis, taking away most of the suspension of the Unimog. So when they took these things off-road, they were bouncing and hopping all over the place because, well, the suspension was gone, so they were almost dangerous to drive around out there and nearly rolled over several times. But eventually they re-engineered the mounting of that box, which helped out a little bit. And another part is that the Unimog is pretty small, so not only was it really difficult for people to get in and out of that cab in full firefighting gear, but also the ambulance, or the part where the stretcher is in the back, that was just a really tiny cramped room. So overall, they were not even terribly happy with these vehicles. And that's part of the reason why it was handed off to the Army eventually, so that they could use it for something else. I just brought out one of the seats to try and demonstrate just how little room there is in one of these and how awkward it is to get in and out, because there's not even a step out here. There is, well, there's not on this one, but there should have been just a ring on the wheel that you could step onto, and that's really all you had. I just have to use the hub. Now the Unimogs, they often look big, but it is kind of deceiving, especially with these old ones, because they're really quite cramped on the inside. Even more so on the passenger side, because there is no footwell over there. Now, can you imagine getting in and out of this little thing in a hurry with full firefighter gear on and all that stuff? Wouldn't have been too much fun. And I've been told that it was pretty much the same story with the ambulance firefighter box they put on the back of this. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures from the inside of that, but I was told that there was just barely room to get a stretcher in there, but you really couldn't fit people in there to do the job that they were meant to do. Right. But regardless of how terrible this was at its given task, these guys that I've been talking to would really like to have this over in their collection to preserve it along with the rest of their vehicles, because they are part of the military's historical preservation, and these guys specifically are the Danish Airfield Fire and Rescue Organization. And they are working to collect and preserve one running example of all of these former airfield fire rescue vehicles. And they have this entire lineup of all the vehicles from this era, except the Unimog. And as far as we can all tell, this is the last one of them in existence. As I mentioned previously, they really believed that all of them were gone, so they were quite excited to see this thing resurfacing. So I just told them as it was that I'm not going to be getting around to this anytime soon anyway, because, well, let's face it, I have a few other things to take care of as well. So honestly, I was happy to work with these guys and let them take over this project, because they are going to get on it more or less right away, not immediately, but sooner than I would, and they are going to be preserving this thing for the long haul, and I think that's pretty cool. So we worked out a solution, and this thing is essentially theirs now. And a bit more than that, it is actually a military vehicle again. It had to be re-registered before the military could handle this, because they are not allowed to handle civilian vehicles. So this is now officially a military vehicle. But I am also allowed to keep that bed that we put on there. They told me if I wanted it, I should just keep that, because they're not going to be using it. They want to put that original ambulance box on the back of this again. So we got to get this thing off. And luckily, I never got around to bolting it down, so we should be able to just lift it right off there. Any good place to put this, so it's just going back here in the corner for now. So yeah, I'm not really sure what I'm gonna be doing with this bed now. I mean, I suppose it could be modified to put it on a 416 Unimog, because it is more or less the exact same construction, only with some different mountings underneath. But I don't have an extra 416 to put it on right now, so I guess until I find something to use it for, this thing is up for sale if someone is looking for an original Unimog bed. And no, it's not all bent and twisted. This whole construction is meant to do that, so it can follow that twisting frame on the Unimog. So, next thing is, I gotta sort through all of these Unimog components I have laying over here and find all the stuff that belongs to that one, so we can get that packed up and sent out along with it. I know that's the radiator and those are the seats, so it's probably some of the stuff over here. Yes, I know it's a Scania box. I didn't have a Mercedes box. Alright, so that should be everything. There's even a few extra parts in here because some of these old engine covers, they have been modified a little bit to fit that diesel engine, but I had another set of those, so I'm just throwing them in as well. Well, this would still have been quite a bit easier if this could just start up and drive itself around. That is part of the reason why I was trying to get that engine running. But all of this is also the reason why I wasn't spending a whole lot of time and especially money to get that thing going, because these guys are of course going to be pulling that diesel out of here and put the original 6-cylinder gasoline back into this thing. But I don't know exactly when they are going to be coming to pick this thing up. I've just been told it's going to be one of these next couple of days, so I'm just going to be leaving it here, ready to load up. Alright people, it has now been almost 2 months since I filmed the first part of this video, and this thing is still sitting right here. And ironically, it's been raining almost every single day since I brought this outside, so it was kind of pointless to keep it indoors in the first place. But then again, it was sitting outside for years before I got it, so a couple of months is not really going to make a difference anyway. So there's been another change of plans. Seems to be a lot of that going around with this vehicle. Now, it's still being handed over to the museum, but the guys over there have been trying really hard to arrange some sort of transport for this. But the thing is that due to the current world situation, the armed forces are very busy moving around stuff. So it's been very difficult to try and get a transport for this, and obviously old museum vehicles and stuff like this, they don't have any priority, and they certainly can't set up an entire transport just for this. So it would have to be on a trip where they are running empty anyway and just happen to come around here, which just has not happened. So I should probably just say that the place this is going to is an old military airbase. Now, it's no longer an active airbase, but some of those big hangar bunkers out there, they are still in use, mostly for storing things like these old museum vehicles, because they are bunkers, so it's a pretty safe place to keep things. Now, I was talking to the museum guys over there, and they let me know that there is an upcoming event at that airbase, and I should come on over for a visit and see what they got going on over there. And as we were talking, I brought up the idea of, you know, if I'm going over there anyway, why don't I just bring the Unimog to you? And they let me know that they just really didn't want to bother me with that, and I just assured them that it's really no problem. So now we gotta haul this over to them. Now this really would have been another great opportunity to test out the old Magios, but unfortunately I am still waiting for the paperwork for that thing, so it is still grounded here. And it seems I just have to do all the hauling now that we don't have any of these heavy vehicles in operation. So once again, we are gonna have to resort to the good old trusty Humvee with a trailer. Well, that is quite the setup we got going on here. Humvee with a Unimog. That is really cool. Oh yeah, and by the way, I do realize we could have just used the backhoe to get it up onto the trailer instead of that little hand crank winch, but it's just much more controlled using that and just slowly getting it up on there. Because this stuff is really heavy, so if we start pushing and shoving with the backhoe as well, we can really quickly put a lot more force on everything than it was designed to handle. So we just took the gentle approach. I gotta say, I'm a bit curious as to how the Humvee is gonna handle this load, because we are just on the very limit of what I can legally load up on this setup. Well, actually, just for the trailer, the Humvee could still legally carry a bit more in the back, but this is the heaviest load I've had on the Humvee so far. But to be fair, the last couple of things we've been towing around with this really wasn't an issue, so I don't think this is going to be either. All right, people, I was going to end this video with the Unimog being driven off on the back of some military truck. Well, I guess it's still on the back of a military truck. But now that we are going to be delivering this thing, I think what I'm going to do is split this into 2 videos. Because just the whole drive over there and whatever's going to happen over there is probably going to be enough to fill a video on its own. But I'll be sure to get that edited and uploaded as soon as possible, so you don't have to wait too long to see that. And if it's already up by the time you're watching this, the link for it is going to be down in the description. So thank you all for watching along, and I'll see you in the next one.